Well, hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Goldie Show. I was about to begin, but Jesse Waters just went live and he's speaking about Iran. So let's go to that.
Ran into a guy like President Trump. And I think President Trump has really put pressure on him. And I think we'll see what happens now. Do they buckle under that pressure? I think they will.
So here's the memorandum of understanding that could be signed as early as Saturday. The Strait immediately reopens and will lift the blockade if the waters remain calm. Also, no tolling, ever. And here's the big one. The Iranians have agreed in principle to destroy and remove their enriched uranium. This will be supervised by the United States and the International Atomic Energy Committee. It's buried deep as a skyscraper. To extract it, it's dangerous, it's volatile, and pretty technical. But in terms of the timeline, it's going to be removed quickly. Once it's out of the country, then and only then does Iran get sanctions relief. There is going to be vigilant inspections, and Iran will not fund terrorism. If they do, they will not receive any economic benefits. The broader goal is to establish peace in the Middle East. This means Iran must behave like a normal country, not sponsor terrorism. We will only unfreeze assets when they do what they've agreed to do. Senior administration officials tell Primetime that Epic Fury did $1 trillion of damage to Iran. $1 trillion. Gulf allies have agreed to invest $200 billion in infrastructure and energy projects to rebuild. This creates stronger ties between the countries. Economic integration almost always prevents war. But this reconstruction of Iran is tied to Iran's performance. This entire deal is performance-based. The deal also folds in Lebanon. Israel will not attack Hezbollah there, but if Hezbollah attacks Israel, Israel can defend itself. Iran's got to keep Hezbollah on a leash. If they don't, no sanctions relief. Netanyahu was briefed on the deal, and he's comfortable with it, we're hearing, as long as Iran complies. He's a little bit more skeptical of the Iranians, but if they perform, he likes it. This deal, if it goes through, Iran is giving us a long-term commitment, no nuclear weapons. We're eliminating their stockpile of uranium. Their nuclear scientists have all been killed. Their 3 nuke sites are all buried deep underground. Their military, for the most part, has been decimated. Their steel and industrial plants have been obliterated so they can't rebuild their military. Now, if this deal goes through, Trump will be traveling to the G7 in France next week with a crowning achievement: the defeat of the world's #1 sponsor of terror, full denuclearization, the reestablishment of the world's free flow of oil, and a Mideast on the precipice of a lasting peace. Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane joins us now. General, from what you're hearing about the contours of this deal, how do you feel about it?
Well, everything I've heard so far, obviously from the administration,
sounds good on paper.
Seems pretty positive, and we're moving obviously in the right direction. The stuff we've heard out of the Iranians, obviously, is likely people who don't want any part of this deal. There's one thing I think we need to hear. I don't believe anybody from the administration has said it yet, and that is that the Ayatollah approves this. Political, military leaders, that's one thing. Head of state is something else again, and I don't believe President Trump could ever sign anything until he knows for a fact that that happens. And maybe it already has happened, and hopefully it has. The other thing is, I think we have to remind ourselves always who we are really dealing with here. And that means the ingredients in the deal are predicated on who we're dealing with. And Iran, we know what they want. They want to survive. They want to recover what they've lost. And we've got to remember this, they want to reverse all the tenets of the deal that they agreed to. That is who they are. How do we know that? Because after the 12-day war, Jesse, after that war, the thing that alarmed us is Iran recommitted to all of its goals after we took down their nuclear enterprise and after the Israelis did so much damage to their military capacity. And what do I mean by that? One, they made a decision to recover nuclear. 2, they were accelerated their ballistic missile and drone inventories. And 3, they changed their network and how they were supporting their proxies, but they kept funding them. So all of the things we wanted to set back, those weren't the goals overall, but they were certainly part of the process to push them back. That alarmed us in terms of who they are. They haven't changed in my book. They're the same people. So in the deal, we have got to make certain that we enforce compliance and that the deal is enduring, to be sure. And a couple of points of clarification. Their behavior right now is an indicator of who they are. The ceasefire took place on April the 8th, and they've been violated just about every day. Tonight, in the Straits of Hormuz, they're violating it. Hezbollah is firing into northern Israel tonight, despite the fact we're on the cusp of making a deal. This is who they are. So we want them to comply with this ceasefire. They haven't complied with the one we're under right now, to be sure. And that's got to be a predicate in the deal. Another point of contention is Lebanon itself. Part of the agreement is that Hezbollah is supposed to move north of the Litani River, which gets them away from Israel's border, which they've been using to fire into northern Israel. 300 plus wounded. All of those villages and towns evacuated. Kids haven't been going to school for weeks. That's got to change as a part of this deal. Move north of the Litani River, or else we don't have a deal here. Because Hezbollah has violated that ceasefire when it was put into effect, special ceasefire on April 17th. Not once in a while, every single day. 2,000 plus rockets and drones fired. So our negotiators understand everything I just said. And so in the deal itself, as it manifests itself going forward, we've got to make certain, the negotiators, that we hold Iran compliant and enforce that compliance. And the deal has got to be enduring. This isn't temporary. This has got to be something we put in place that fundamentally changes their behavior.
How would you enforce compliance if they open the strait, we kind of lift the blockade as the straits open, and people start making oil money again, and then you get into this negotiation about destroying and removing the uranium, and they screw us? They just drag it out, tap us along.
That's what they're going to do.
What would you do then?
That's what they're going to do.
Well, a couple of things. What we have over them initially certainly is the blockade itself, and we want to see them. By the way, so our audience understands, we have been dominating the Straits of Hormuz. We haven't seen a fast boat in weeks. And the last time we saw them, we destroyed them. And every once in a while, they fire at us with drones, which we defeat. Just so as background to what has actually happened in the Straits of Hormuz. Yes, that naval blockade has been very, very powerful. And the reality is we still have leverage with that, and make certain it's going to take some time to see that the straits are truly open and there's no undercurrent of control being administered by the Iranians here and trying to say when ships should move, what routes they're going to move in, any level of imposing control. That's something that they want, and we have to make certain that doesn't exist. And we have leverage there. Money, you mentioned it. Money is a leverage here. And we meter that out only when behavior, when performance has changed. There's rumors that there's going to be windfalls of money coming out of the UAE. I can't imagine the administration buying into any of that. They said there wasn't going to be any money up front. It's only going to be based on behavior change. I'm accepting the administration at their word, and I think they will hold people's feet to the fire here, and we're not handing out gifts here. And then the final lever is we have kinetic actions. And I know for a fact that the president was absolutely prepared to go back in tonight, tomorrow night, etc., to force the Iranians into making this deal. And he's not giving up on that gas pedal. And he has that as leverage. And I don't think he needs to say it too often to convince them that he means it, because he's already done it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And until the uranium is fully destroyed and removed from the country, this thing's not over. Until then, we'll just wait and see how they behave. General, thank you so much.
Yeah, great talking, a great rundown today.
Thank you. Hunter is finally out of witness protection, so he sat down with knee pads for a job interview.
I'm joined today by presidential candidate Hunter Biden. 2020.
All right, so that was just a quick, sneak peek into what's being reported on Fox News. So for everyone who's tuning in, welcome to tonight's evening edition of the Goldie Show. I'm your host, Goldie Ghamari, former Canadian politician, current geopolitical analyst, and I'm here to explain everything when it comes to Iran, the Middle East, terrorism, and of course, the current conflict between the Islamic regime occupying Iran, the United States, and Israel. Now, I actually had a whole analysis planned out for you. However, we got very lucky tonight because usually one of the top geopolitical analysts in the world when it comes to the Islamic regime and occupied Iran did his live stream early. And some of you know who I'm referring to. I'm talking about Morad Vaisi. So let me pull up Morad Vaisi for you, for those of you who might not be familiar with him. Morad Vaisi is a top geopolitical analyst when it comes to all things Iran, the Islamic regime, and the current conflict between the Islamic regime, the United States, and Israel. And I have a special treat for you guys tonight because Morad Vaisi actually went live an hour ago. He went live an hour ago and gave not only his analysis, but he gave exclusive insider information as to what's happening right now in occupied Iran. And so the reason that I'm starting my live stream a little bit later is because I figured instead of giving you my analysis tonight, I'll give you Morad Vaisi's analysis, because I actually have Morad Vaisi's permission to translate his live streams and share them in English. So tonight's live stream comes courtesy of Morad Vaisi, and I'm going to read what he is saying. I'm also going to share with you questions from the Iranian people. about everything that's going on, because that's also going to give all of you input and insight into what Iranian people think of the entire situation, right? So you're going to have to bear with me. The format of today's live stream is going to be a little different, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by actually reading his analysis. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Make the font bigger. I'm going to start out by just, reading his analysis for you and sharing it, because I'm going to make this bigger. Can I make this bigger? There we go. Okay. How do I do this? Sorry, guys. Give me one moment. Like literally, he literally just finished his live, which is why I'm just setting it up now for you, because, I could give you the insider sneak peek, but there's no one better than Morad Vaisi who can actually give you the insider sneak peek. Okay? So let me just change the format here, because I'm going to be reading and I want to make sure that it is set up properly. How am I doing this? Ah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, technical difficulties, guys. Okay. So I'm going to be giving you the Morad Vaisi analysis here. So you're going to bear with me, because I'm basically going to be reading from his script. And then when he is done, then I will take a look at, when I'm done reading his analysis, then I'm going to look at the live chat and I'm going to answer your questions. But this is like literally exclusive insider information that you guys will not find anywhere else. You're not going to find it in the mainstream media. You're not going to find it on like other YouTuber blogs or anything like that. You're not going to find it in English whatsoever. What's going on with this app here? What's going on with my app? Sorry, guys. This is so weird. Let me try this again. Let me restart. Oh my gosh, what is happening right now? Sorry, guys, I'm having some technical difficulties for some reason. This is so strange. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here we go. Here is, mag bad apps. I know, guys, right? Like all these issues we're having. All right, so here we go. This is the Morad Vaisi analysis, literally hot off the press from an hour ago. If anyone knows the Islamic regime and the internal machinations of the Islamic regime, it's Morad Vaisi. So I'm just gonna read this for you really quick. Then we'll go to some of your comments, questions, super chats, whatever the case might be. So he starts off by saying, where am I here? So he starts off by saying, American officials, whoa, what's going on? Jeez. Oh my gosh, guys, sorry. What is wrong with my computer today? Okay. There we go. All right. Okay. We got it all set up. So we're ready to go, guys. So Morad Vaisi starts out by saying, American officials and officials of the Islamic Republic are discussing the possibility of a memorandum of understanding, a memorandum that would establish a 60-day ceasefire. During that period, the two sides would sit down and negotiate their major disagreements. The meaning of this memorandum would essentially be that, for the time being, they would stop fighting and spend 60 days determining whether their fundamental disputes can be resolved. That's where things currently stand. However, both sides have their own interpretations of what this means. And then Morad Vaisi continues. He says, first, he's going to explain the American interpretation. Then he's going to explain the Islamic Republic's interpretation. And after that, he's also going to discuss Israel's position. And then finally, he will provide an overall assessment of where the Islamic Republic stands after a year of war. And the reason that he says 1 year of war is because today is actually the 1 year anniversary of when Israel last year began their attacks against the Islamic regime occupying Iran, severely weakening the Islamic regime. So he continues, from June 12 of last year, the night the war began against the Islamic Republic, until June 12 of this year, 12 months have passed. And he continues, the question is, in what condition is the Islamic Republic now? Even if we assume that it signs an agreement, what kind of Islamic Republic are we talking about today? He says, let me first explain the latest positions of both sides and provide some analysis. Then we'll discuss Israel and finally reach an overall conclusion. He then cites Axios. Now, I'm not a big fan of Axios, but Morad Vaisi seems to like citing Axios. I don't know why, because Axios is pretty much fake news, but I mean, it is what it is. So he continues. Axios, citing Trump, reported that the memorandum could be signed on Sunday or Monday. That is, within the next 48 to 72 hours. Araghchi, guys, remember, Araghchi is the foreign affairs minister of the Islamic regime. Araghchi is the one that actually President Trump posted the image of his tweet or post or whatever on his Truth Social. Remember? So if we go to President Trump's Truth Social, there we go. So that's what President Trump posted, shared on his Truth Social today. That's Araghchi, the foreign affairs minister. Okay? So let's continue. So Morad Vaisi says, Araghchi has said that it will be signed digitally. Oh, wait, where are we here? Araghchi has said that it will be signed digitally, meaning that we are not going there in person. Guys, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So the foreign affairs minister, after President Trump posted this message from Araghchi on his Truth Social, the message is, the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding has never been closer. Pending its finalization, the media should refrain from entering speculation about its content. In line with our responsible and transparent approach, all details will be shared with the public in due course. How interesting is it then that after President Trump shares this message from the foreign affairs minister of the Islamic regime, Araghchi is now stating that they're going to sign this deal or memorandum of understanding or whatever they want to call it digitally. Does that not sound suspect? Does that not sound strange? I mean, I haven't heard of a single peace treaty or agreement or whatever where it's signed digitally. This is literally giving me like Joe Biden auto pen vibes, right? Joe Biden auto pen vibes. And President Trump is not the kind of person who will agree to signing this, MOU digitally. Like, he's not going to agree to that. Like, this is an insult in and of itself, right? But anyway, let's continue. So, Morad Vaisi says, Araghchi has said that it will be signed digitally, meaning that we are not going there in person, referring to the Islamic regime. Right? Then he continues. News agencies have reported that American transport aircraft are carrying logistical equipment to Geneva for J.D. Vance's trip. At the same time, Trump is also traveling for a meeting, and American aircraft are transporting equipment related to that visit as well. It's not yet clear whether the agreement will actually be signed in Geneva, but Araghchi has stated that it will be signed digitally. Yeah. Could you imagine, guys, just a little pause here. Could you imagine, like, JD Vance or President Trump or Marco Rubio or whoever, they go to Geneva to sign this treaty, and the Islamic regime is like, nope, we're not going to show up. We're going to sign it digitally. All you get is the auto pen. You think Trump's going to agree to that? Yeah. Anyways, let's continue. So Morad Vaisi says, at the same time that both sides are saying they're moving towards an agreement, sounds of conflict, aka boom booms, are still being heard in the Strait of Hormuz. So literally tonight, right now, explosions were again reported in Josk, Sirik, and Qishm. So let's go to my favorite OSINT account to get the latest updates on these boom booms. Because even though everyone is saying we're very close to a deal, apparently boom booms are still being heard. Look at this. So, a vessel was hit by an IRGC, that stands for Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, projectile near the Strait of Hormuz. And then Fars News, IRGC-owned propaganda outlet, says explosions. So Mehr News, like the Islamic regime media outlet, is saying explosions heard around Qishm Island and Sirik, Hormozgan province. Initial reports suggest a conflict near the Strait of Hormuz. No official confirmation. Authorities on nature of explosions. And then apparently the sounds heard are related to warning shots fired at vessels violating regulations in the Strait of Hormuz. So it's pretty clear and obvious that the Islamic regime, they're still attacking vessels who are moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? So that's what Morad Vaisi is referring to when he's talking about the current boom booms. Now, let's continue. He says it's unclear whether the Americans struck something or whether the Revolutionary Guard is conducting operations intended to obstruct maritime traffic. However, I just shared with you the OSINT report that this is apparently coming from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I mentioned this, and then so he continues. I mentioned this to demonstrate how fragile the situation remains. Even while negotiations are taking place, there is always a possibility that they will fail to reach an agreement and return to military confrontation. Then Morad Vaisi turns to Pakistan. He says Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shahbaz Sharif, who has acted as a mediator, says an agreement has been reached and that the text is ready for signature by both parties. He doesn't provide any analysis on that, but I'm gonna provide my own commentary. Yeah, Pakistan, I have no idea what they're talking about. The fact that the Prime Minister of Pakistan is claiming that like an agreement has been reached and both parties are going to sign it, that's wild. That's wild to me. Literally, the country that hid Osama bin Laden is now going, praise be to Allah, we've reached a negotiation deal or something, right? Like, it's just wild to me. And then he continues. Let me just go through a little bit here. There we go. So he continues. Abbas Araghchi, so that's the foreign affairs minister, continues to say that right now, the discussions concern ending the war. The nuclear issue will be discussed later. So guys, this is like the insider info that you're not hearing in the mainstream media. Because President Trump is saying that one of the main conditions is ending the military nuclear enrichment program, right? Ending the military nuclear enrichment program, and of course, getting rid of the nuclear dust that's inside of occupied Iran. However, even though President Trump has always said that the nuclear enrichment issue is like his red line. In Persian, in Persian media networks or wherever, like in like Islamic regime state media, Araghchi is apparently claiming that the discussions right now only concern ending the war. They don't actually concern the nuclear issue. So once again, what the Islamic regime is saying to President Trump's negotiation team versus what the Islamic regime is saying to its own people in Persian is completely different, right? Because I've said this to you before, if their lips are moving, they're lying. And so the way that Abbas Araghchi, the foreign affairs minister, is trying to convince supporters within the Islamic regime to agree to this deal is he's actually coming out and saying flat out that the discussions between the United States and America only concern ending the war, and that the nuclear issue is not on the table. So what the Islamic regime essentially is saying in Persian, right? They're saying this in Persian because they're hoping that English media and English pundits don't pick up on this. They're saying that, yeah, sure, like whatever, like we'll pretend that, the nuclear whatever, but that's actually not what we're discussing. We're only discussing ending the war, and the nuclear issue will be discussed later at some point in time. The Islamic regime, and so Murad Vaisi continues. He says the Islamic regime wants to call this deal an agreement to end the war. But then he continues. The Americans are emphasizing the nuclear aspects. And he says it is possible that both issues are included in the deal. In international relations, every actor tends to emphasize the aspects of an agreement that it likes, and it minimizes the aspects it does not. And then he says, for the Americans, the nuclear issue is the priority, and I agree with that assessment. They're saying that Iran's enriched uranium will be taken away, enrichment activities will be halted, verification measures will be implemented, and restrictions will be imposed. The Islamic regime, meanwhile, says that the war is ending. And it says that sanctions will be lifted, the blockade will end, and each side is interpreting the agreement from its own perspective. What's really interesting about the narrative from the Islamic regime is that we literally just watched Jesse Waters on, Fox News Live. And Jesse Waters was saying, sure, maybe sanctions will be lifted and the blockade will end in the future, but that's based on whether or not the Islamic regime, first of all, signs the deal and then actually acts on the deal, right? So this is where the Islamic regime propaganda is kind of blowing up, no pun intended. Because the Islamic regime is claiming that President Trump just wants to automatically and immediately lift the blockade, automatically and immediately lift the sanctions. But that's not exactly what's happening, is it? In order for those things to happen, certain conditions must be met. But the Islamic regime is pretending as if America is desperate to lift the naval blockade, and America is desperate to end the war, even though President Trump has said several times that he's not in a rush, and in fact, it's the Islamic regime that's calling him desperate, begging. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Whenever the Islamic regime is speaking, if their lips are moving, they're lying. And the reason that they're trying to now portray themselves as this strong, competent, whatever, is because they're desperate. And there's an internal meltdown happening inside of the Islamic regime. This meltdown is why they are blatantly lying. They say one thing in English, but then they turn around and say another thing in Persian. So Morad Vaisi continues. He said, President Trump made an interesting statement today. He said there is no such thing as negotiating in good faith with the disgraced officials of the Islamic regime. First, it's notable that President Trump used the word disgraced to describe officials of the Islamic Republic. Second, when he says there is no good faith negotiation, he's referring to a fundamental principle of international relations. In international relations, there's no such thing as trust. I agree with this, by the way. No one truly trusts anyone else. What exists are national power and national interests. If you want to protect your national interests, you must possess power. And the foundation of international relations is power. There have traditionally been two major schools of thought in international relations. And he says, I studied this at university. One is the idealist school, which argues that international relations should be based on international law. And according to this view, we should create international organizations, strengthen international law, expand treaties, and thereby establish international peace and security. But then he continues and he says, the opposing school is realism. Realists argue that the basis of international relations is power. Yeah, I'm definitely a realist guys. I'm definitely a realist because I've literally experienced it myself. The basis of international relations is power. That's literally why President Trump's foreign policy is peace through strength. Anyways, let's continue. So he says, the stronger a state is, the more effectively it can secure its national interests. A state without power becomes vulnerable, and its interests are trampled. During periods when a stable international order exists, institutions such as the United Nations, which is garbage, by the way, the Security Council, and mechanisms based on international law become more influential. For example, he continues, and he gives this example. From roughly 1990 to 2020, international law, the Security Council, and the UN exercised significant influence. But for at least the last decade, the Security Council has largely lost its effectiveness. Guys, so if you don't know why, that's because the Security Council has five permanent members on it. That's United States, Russia, China, France, and the UK, I believe. And each one of those permanent members has the right to veto any vote. So even if the Security Council votes on something, and even if there's like a majority vote, if it's against Russia's or China's interests, they can veto the vote. And so the Security Council becomes, in essence, completely useless, right? And that's what Morad Vaisi is talking about. He's saying that the Security Council has largely lost its effectiveness because it's basically the United States on one side and then Russia and China on the other, and they're constantly vetoing each other's votes, right? Because there's still a Cold War going on. The Cold War never ended between the East and the West. Anyway, so he continues. So let's continue. So Morad Vaisi says, the Security Council has largely lost its effectiveness, and the United Nations has lost much of its influence as well. Why? Because a new international order is emerging. So Morad Vaisi thinks a new international order is emerging. This is very interesting, guys. So he continues, whenever an international order breaks down and a new one is forming, new powers emerge. And these new powers say, we want our share of the world. Because their interests were either ignored or insufficiently recognized under the previous order, they seek to reshape the international system according to their new status. And he gives the example of China. He says, for example, China today is very different from China in 1980. China is now the world's second superpower after the United States. Economically, it's the second largest power in the world. The United States has an economy of roughly $33 trillion, while China's economy is around the low $20 trillion range. Together, they account for roughly half of the world's economic output. And he says that China says there was once a time when the Soviet Union and the United States competed for global influence. Now I am here. So Morad Vaisi is basically saying that China and the Chinese Communist Party has replaced the Soviet Union when it comes to fighting against the United States for global influence. And then he continues and he mentions another country. He mentions India. And India says, I am here too. And then he continues and he says, gradually, some powers rise while others decline. He thinks that Japan's power is declining. He also thinks that the European Union is declining, and he thinks that Russia is also declining. However, he continues and says that meanwhile, powers such as China and India are rising because they want an international order that reflects their new position in the world. And that's why global equations are changing. And as a result, institutions such as the Security Council and the United Nations are no longer functioning as effectively as before. And he continues by saying, once a new order becomes established, entirely new international institutions may emerge, or existing institutions like the Security Council may regain a different form of importance. Therefore, when President Trump says that there is no trust and no good faith, he's pointing to a central principle of international relations. Power is what determines outcomes. Power in today's world consists of several key elements. And then he says, I don't want to spend too much time explaining all of them, but there are roughly 7 major components of national power. He talks about economic power. The stronger a country's economy, the stronger the country itself. Countries like China, India, the U.S., and Saudi Arabia derive much of their influence from economic strength. The second element of power is military power. Economic and military power work together. Who has a stronger economy? Now he says, the Americans say, we have the stronger military. We can impose a blockade on the Islamic Republic. We can bomb it. They cannot bomb us in the same way. We have aircraft carriers. The Islamic Republic does not. So in that sense, the United States, when it comes to military power, does have the upper hand and the advantage when it comes to the global international system. Guys, are you finding this useful? I think this analysis is fascinating, but let me know what you think in the comments, because I've already watched this and, I learned a lot from Morad Vaisi, but oh my gosh, we got some weird communist in the chat. Yeah, you guys like this? Okay, all right, I'll continue. Guys, this is pure gold, Okay, so we're going to power. So now we're going to power element number 3 that Morad Vaisi is talking about, okay? So then he says, another element is diplomatic power. Part of the confrontation between the United States and the Islamic regime is a diplomatic struggle. And diplomatic power comes partly from experience, from skilled diplomats, and intelligent foreign policy. However, a country's diplomatic power does not depend solely on diplomats. It also depends on economic strength, military strength, and political power. Those broader sources of power give diplomats leverage at the negotiating table. Another component of national power is media influence. And he continues, he says, the Americans dominate the global media landscape. They are leading, they are the leading media power in the world. Another element is the relationship between a government and its people. When you examine each of these categories, the Islamic regime has become weaker. Its relationship with the public, he's referring to the Iranian people, its relationship with the Iranian people is poor. Many people want the regime overthrown. It is not strong in the media sphere. It is not strong diplomatically. It is certainly not strong economically. And it is definitely not strong militarily. And then he continues, when all these factors are combined, they form a country's overall national power. And then he said, guys, this is like the insider information, okay? He says, the reason the Islamic Republic is currently negotiating from a weaker position is that its overall power resources are weaker than those of the United States. And as for the memorandum currently being discussed, different news agencies are reporting different pieces of information, and no one yet knows exactly what the final version will contain. However, reports suggest that the agreement would involve the destruction or neutralization of enriched uranium stockpiles so that they could no longer be used to build a nuclear weapon. Inspection mechanisms would be imposed. Restrictions would be placed on enrichment activities. The International Atomic Energy Agency would carry out verification measures. The stockpile of enriched uranium would effectively be removed as a strategic asset. And then he continues and says, Abbas Araghchi, the foreign affairs minister, says, the uranium would be diluted outside of Iran. Guys, the foreign affairs minister, Abbas Araghchi, is saying that the uranium would be diluted inside Iran, right? So even though the President Trump has his red line when it comes to removing the nuclear dust, apparently Abbas Araghchi is claiming that the uranium would be diluted inside Iran. Do you think that the Americans are going to agree to that? Do you think President Trump's going to agree to that? When President Trump has openly said that these people are negotiating in bad faith, do you think they're going to agree to that? Yeah, exactly. All right. Then he says, the Americans insist that the material must ultimately lose its weapons potential. Then he says, the priorities being pursued by the United States, nuclear issues, missiles, proxy groups, the Strait of Hormuz, and uranium stockpiles, are not the priorities of the Iranian people, right? Because again, remember, Morad Vaisi is looking at this from the Iranian perspective. So he's saying that the priorities of the United States are not the priorities of the Iranian people. And that makes sense. That makes sense because different nations have different priorities. So he continues and he says, in his view, the priority of the Iranian people isn't nuclear issues, missiles, proxy groups, the Strait of Hormuz, or uranium stockpiles. The priority of the Iranian people is to overthrow the Islamic regime. And then he says, are the people of Iran satisfied with this MOU? And he doesn't think so. Morad Vaisi says that he thinks Iranian people are not satisfied. But he also says the Americans will act according to their own national interests. Then he continues. Now this is interesting because he's quoting CNN here, and he says CNN has reported that the agreement will probably be signed in Switzerland. And as mentioned earlier, Abbas Araghchi says it will be signed digitally. Do you think that the Americans are going to agree to sign this like historic historic deal if it actually gets to that point. But do you think President Trump's going to agree to sign this digitally? Like, that's wild. It's wild that like the Islamic regime has the audacity to still say this stuff. But he continues. He says nothing is final yet. And then he goes on to give some insider info from Islamic regime media outlets. He says the Fars News Agency and Tasnim News Agency, both of these news agencies are affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They have denied that the agreement has been finalized. So even though the Prime Minister of Pakistan is claiming that everyone has agreed to everything, and even though the Foreign Affairs Minister, Abbas Araghchi, is claiming that there's an agreement in principle, right now, as of this moment, on Islamic regime state TV inside of occupied Iran, Islamic regime media outlets are denying that an agreement has been finalized. And then he continues. He says, Fars News specifically rejected reports claiming that a signing ceremony in Geneva has already been arranged. According to reports, during the proposed 60-day ceasefire period, the parties would negotiate issues related to the nuclear program, enrichment activities, and the dilution of uranium stockpiles. And then the Islamic regime propaganda outlet continues and says, if an understanding is reached, guys, so he's basically saying if an understanding is reached, not if like the deal is concluded, if an understanding is reached, the Strait of Hormuz would reopen fully. Now he continues, he says the Americans have reportedly said that if the Strait of Hormuz remains open and the Islamic Republic fulfills its commitments, they would lift the blockade. But then Morad Vaisi, top geopolitical analyst on Iran, he continues and he actually quotes J.D. Vance, and he says, J.D. Vance has said, we are not giving them any money. He reportedly stated that no money would be released immediately and that first, the Islamic regime must demonstrate compliance. There were also reports, particularly from Reuters, that the United Arab Emirates would facilitate access to approximately $10 billion in frozen Iranian funds. Reuters further reported that roughly $3 billion had already been made available. So someone was leaking some information to Reuters claiming that the UAE was going to release $10 billion in frozen assets and that $3 billion had already been unfrozen. However, the UAE quickly denied these reports, saying that no such transfer has taken place. Thus, Reuters is claiming that money has already been released, while the UAE says it has not been released. There's a little bit more drama and fog of war for you guys. Then he continues and he says, J.D. Vance's position is that any financial release would come only after an agreement is signed and obligations are fulfilled. Even then, the money involved would not be new American aid, but rather frozen Iranian assets. And then Morad Vaisi continues. The officials of the Islamic regime occupying Iran have previously insisted that they would not sign any agreement unless their assets were unfrozen first. And that's the kicker, guys. That's the kicker, because President Trump, J.D. Vance, and everyone else on the American side is making it very clear. Sign the agreement, agree to the terms, abide by the terms, comply with the terms, and then we will unfreeze your assets. However, on the Islamic regime side, in Persian, what you are not hearing in the mainstream media is that the Islamic regime is openly saying that they are not going to sign anything until their assets, by the way, the assets belong to the Iranian people. The assets don't belong to the Islamic regime until, the assets are first unfrozen. Yeah, I have a feeling that's not going to happen. I have a feeling that's not going to happen. But you don't hear about this. You don't hear about this in mainstream media, right? You never hear about this. Okay. Let me just do. Okay. I'm just keeping an eye on Fox News because Sean Hannity is going live soon. And then we're going to take a quick break in my translation of Morad Vaisi. We're going to go to Sean Hannity because I want to know the latest news from, the American side, and we'll continue. However, the Islamic regime is literally claiming that they're not going to sign anything until the United States unfreezes their assets. That is literally the exact opposite of what President Trump and J.D. Vance and others are saying. Do you see the meltdown? Like, the Islamic regime, they're going to President Trump and they're begging for more time. They're begging for, a delay or whatever the case might be. But then they literally turn around and they're making these very, very bold assumptions that, oh my gosh, we're not going to sign a deal until the United States releases our assets first, as if President Trump is ever going to do that. Guys, this is the angle that you don't see in the mainstream media. This is the insider info that the Islamic regime does not want you to know about. Guys, they are literally having a meltdown on the inside. And Morad Vaisi is exposing all of this. However, he's exposing this in Persian, right? Because all of his live streams are in Persian. But don't worry, I got you. That's why I'm translating this for you, because this live stream from tonight was spicy. All right, let's continue. So he says, now, however, it appears they may sign first. So he's referring to the Islamic regime. He's saying, it now appears that maybe the Islamic regime might actually sign first and then seek the release of assets afterwards. Under the reported framework, the assets would only become available once the Strait of Hormuz is reopened and commitments are fulfilled, aka compliance. And then he continues. Another Trump administration official reportedly stated that any serious reduction in sanctions would depend on how faithfully the Islamic Republic implements its obligations in practice. If it fulfills those obligations, sanctions relief could follow. Morad Vaisi then turns to comments made by Abbas Araghchi, the foreign affairs minister, on television. So Morad Vaisi, just like myself and others, monitors Islamic regime TV, right? He monitors the Durka News Network so that he can give updates and analysis. Now, his analysis is in Persian, but I'm going to translate it for you. So he continues and he says, today on Islamic regime state TV, Abbas Araghchi said several notable things. One was that the memorandum is associated with Islamabad. The Islamic Republic apparently prefers that Pakistan receives credit for the diplomatic process and not Qatar. And Morad Vaisi found that very politically interesting, that the Islamic regime is pretty much giving turning against Qatar and instead trying to promote Pakistan. So he finds that interesting because he thinks that there might be some sort of tension in the background between the Islamic regime and Qatar. Qatar is also a terrorist state, but that's besides the point. Pakistan is a terrorist state as well. But there you go. So he found that very politically interesting. So I'm sure he's going to have more to say on that in the future. And then he continues and he says, Araghchi also reportedly said that the memorandum concerns only ending the war. Again, he reminds his viewers, the Americans want to emphasize the nuclear aspects, while the Islamic regime wants to emphasize the end of hostilities. Each side is highlighting the parts of the agreement that best support its narrative. And then he continues, Morad Vaisi says, Araghchi on Islamic regime TV in Persian further stated that the future administration of the Strait of Hormuz. Oh, wait. Okay, guys, we're going to Sean Hannity. Wait, what's going on?
Foreign minister, along with Pakistani negotiators and President Trump himself, all agree a possible peace deal is imminent. But now the president is slamming Iranian state media for lying about the contents of a potential peace agreement.
I just
According
called
to the
it!
White House, the actual deal completely disarms Iran's nuclear program and doesn't give any money to the Iranian government for signing off on the initial peace agreement. In the meantime, the U.S. blockade will continue until Iran officially agrees to President Trump's terms. Here now with a full report, Rich Edson is with us live from Washington. Rich, great to see you.
Guys, I literally just said Islamic Regime TV is lying about the deal.
Administration official says the sides are about 85% of the way there, which would begin a 60-day implementation phase. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has been mediating discussions between the United States and Iran. He posted, quote, "We can confirm that a final agreed-upon text of the peace deal has been reached, and Pakistan is now working closely with both sides to finalize the next steps." President Trump suggested there could be a signing ceremony in Europe as early as this weekend. Vice President J.D. Vance posted, quote, "The Iranians are not receiving any cash and no funds are being released for simply signing a deal or attending a meeting. If the Islamic Republic of Iran meets its obligations, then economic benefits will flow to them and to the entire region." The bulk of the details are outstanding, though the administration says Iran needs to open up the Strait of Hormuz, that its frozen assets won't be released until it reaches certain performance metrics, its nuclear program will be dismantled, and it'll stop funding terrorist groups across the region. Back to you.
Rich Edson, thank you.
I'm so good.
So it's safe to say that the president's patience is wearing thin on Truth Social. He called Iranian negotiators, quote, "very dishonorable people to deal with. With them, there is no such thing as dealing in good faith." Also, their totally rebuffed drone attack last night against Indian ships leaving the Hormuz Strait is totally unacceptable. They better get their act together and fast. So why does Iran continue to threaten the strait and jeopardize a potential deal?
Because they're
terrorists.
terrorists.
Now with reaction, former special envoy to Ukraine and Russia, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. Lieutenant General, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So the Iranians say that this is real. President Trump says this is real. And the Pakistanis say this is real. Do we have a real deal in the works?
Well, Charlie, thanks for having me tonight. Look, I would tell everybody listening and thinking about this is to, as we used to say in the airborne community, relax in your harness. Let's wait until we see the deal itself. Otherwise, we're just talking noise because we're not in the room and we don't really know what the end state's going to be. Look, I saw the president today. There is no doubt in my mind he's been resolute and he's been determined and he's got the guts to pull this off. So I think what we ought to do is let them finish the deal, work the deal, and see where it's going to go. You know, the bombing that the 10 strikes actually brought the Iranians to the table. It's not the first time we've ever done that. If you go back to 1972, we saw the same thing happen with President Nixon and Kissinger when the North Vietnamese were just delaying the peace talks and the Paris peace talks and saying this is just being delayed. Well, he unleashed what was called Linebacker 2. He put B-52 bombers over Hanoi and Haiphong and basically bombed them back to the table after 12 days of bombing over the Christmas period. And they lost aircraft because that happens in war where you assume the risk. But it brought them back to the table. You're seeing the same thing here. You're seeing the president very, very determined to get a result. Look, he's not going to screw it up. He said very clearly when this thing started that they're trying to get rid of the enriched uranium and the centrifuges that help that. And then he's doing that because you don't want them to develop a nuclear weapon. And they were well on their way. When you get enriched uranium at 60, 70, 80%, you're heading for a nuclear weapon. You're not doing that for domestic purposes. Now, in Truth Social, he said there was no such thing as dealing in good faith with the Iranians. You know, they've got something you ought to remember. In the Shia community, which is a Muslim community, in Iran, predominantly Shia, they have something called taqiyya. And taqiyya means if you're an infidel, like you and me, they can lie to you and get away with it and saying, well, that's just part of the religion. And I think we have to be very cautious about that they're not being trustworthy. But I am great confidence that President Trump will bring this through and get us to a good deal on that. And I'm just shocked, absolutely shocked, that a lot of Americans don't see this. It's not for our generation. This is a generation of our kids and our grandkids as well. And we've got to ensure that we have peace in the Middle East, and it will change the dynamics of the Middle East for decades to come. When we do get rid of the enriched uranium, when we do stop developing nuclear weapon, and that's what we want to do, and that's what President Trump is determined to do. So I have great confidence he's going to get it done. But I would just say, going completely in the circle, everybody just relax a bit. Let's see what the deal really says and what they come up with, and all we're doing now is speculating, and I don't want to go there.
Right. Well, it is kind of interesting because a lot of President Trump's naysayers claim that he has not been very clear about what the objective here. For those of us who are paying attention, the objective has been very, very clear from the beginning, and that is to destroy Iran's nuclear program. Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, thank you so much. Okay, today, Vice President Vance warned Americans, especially those in the media, not to trust Iranian state TV. The deal they are touting is not real. So what are the odds that Iran actually makes a good faith agreement? Here now with analysis, Middle East Forum Chief Strategist Jim Hansen and former Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates. So great to have you both on tonight. Let me start with you, Jim. Do you believe that we have a real deal in the offing right now?
I think this is one of the first times that the Iranians have actually, through their leaders, ignore their television. Come on, they're propagandists. We don't need to pay attention to that. But their leaders are saying there's a deal on the table. The Pakistanis agree. So I think there is one, and I think we need to look at it from a couple of perspectives. One is, what is the short-term tactical goal? And that's to get control of their nuclear dust, the uranium, and to get the Strait of Hormuz open, the oil flowing, and gas prices down. 100% this deal will do that. But then you've got the longer term strategic, where you're looking at, will they keep this deal? Can we trust them? Can we verify enough to not trust them and still have this work? And that's a longer term prospect. And I'm sure there are a couple plans there. One is the economic prosperity to get the Gulf states and Israel and everybody working together to go ahead and rebuild.
To that, about how confident you are. But also, I want to ask you about this. If indeed the deal, as outlined by the White House, includes removal of nuclear dust, it includes the killing of their nuclear program, it includes opening the Strait of Hormuz, and it includes no more funding of death proxies around the Middle East, that would be a historic agreement.
No, it absolutely would be, Charlie. And I would say, on top of that, as we look at what could or could not be in this agreement, and I would look at this as the president's terms rather than deal. I don't really see the Iranians getting much here. As long as they don't get sanctions relief, every minute that goes by that this agreement is in place, that is worse and worse for the Islamic regime of Iran. They can't go on for that much longer. So what the president is doing is just continuing to bake in all of this pressure on the government of Iran. And he is also saying to the people of Iran, if you would like to have a better life, the United States can be your friend. So we can start looking at ways that could take place.
Yeah, you can do that by bombing the Islamic regime.
No shelf life
boom
for this
them.
Regime. And they are being forced
That's what we want.
Into concessions that are literally bake in their demise with what they're doing. It's a little bit like
convince the Iranian people. You don't need to convince us that the U.S. is our friend.
Jim,
just destroy the Islamic regime.
How is this better?
You don't need to convince us. We're not Durkas.
The Obama deal had a path to nuclear weapons and power baked into it. The sunset clauses of that deal and the complete lack of any, legitimate inspections made sure that the Iranians would eventually have nuclear weapons. So the Obama deal was a death trap. This is a chance to go ahead and stop them now from a path to any path to a new weapon in the short term. But I think Victoria made a good point. This is our chance to show the Iranian people that there's a better opportunity for them. Now, if the regime wants to mend its evil ways and be better and deal with its people in a decent way, okay. But if not, we can make friends with the people. We can do a slow roll of how do we change the government in Iran, not an invasion, but some sort of ability for the people to vote for a new government and have verification of the elections and choose something other than a tyrannical theocratic regime. That would be the real win for the people of Iran.
Right. Victoria, right now, obviously no deal has been signed right now. So the negotiations are going to continue on both sides. Who would you say holds the upper hand right now? Obviously, Iran is dealing with economic misery, the likes of which they've never seen before. But of course, President Trump is looking at an election year, which is no walk in the park for him and for Republicans. Who holds the upper hand right now?
Oh, 100% President Trump. I mean, we won this war militarily, Charlie. I mean, there's no metric by which the Iranians did anything but abjectly lose. Epic fury. I mean, they lost. They can't do anything. We can bomb them whenever we want, wherever we want. So that was a huge victory. And then you look at the economic side. You look at the fact that their exports are down 90%. Their production is down 50%. They can't come back from what's happening. And look at what happened in the United States today. We have the world's first trillionaire, somebody who emigrated to the United States, wants to live here. Elon Musk became the world's first trillionaire. Is that happening in Tehran? I don't think so. I think a third of their stock market is still closed. This is our huge strength. We can overwhelm them. And so I think the leverage is all on President Trump's side.
And not only that, Elon Musk also made more than 4,000 millionaires in one day, which is also not happening in Tehran. Jim and Victoria, thank you both so much. Okay, joining us now with more Missouri Senator and now world famous baseball player, Eric Schmidt. Senator Schmidt, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Real quick,
good to be with you.
How confident are you that the president has a deal right now?
I feel pretty good about it. And I felt all along the president's been very clear about what his mission was that, Iran couldn't have a nuclear weapon. He knocked back their capability in that regard. He knocked back their military to provide room then for this negotiation. And it looks like they're on the precipice of something that's very real here, tangible, and serves America's interest. That's been identified by the president of the United States, which is they're not going to get a nuclear weapon. So the anticipation is that you have the strait totally opened up. I think that'll be a relief for a lot of people in our country, and then also that they won't have their nuclear program. So these are major achievements by a president who is the master deal maker. He always has been, and he's brought those talents to the most important job in the world.
Obviously, President Trump said the other day that during the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. has managed to sneak some 22 oil tankers through. Obviously, having that wide open is going to have an entirely different economic impact on the world and the United States. But, one thing that I think, and it's kind of amazing to me that he never gets any credit for this kind of stuff, but the Abraham Accords, you and I have been watching the politics of the Middle East for freaking decades. For our entire lives, we have been watching this, and nothing ever changed. It was always the same. During his first term, the Abraham Accords turned everything upside down and started to sort of spread hope across the entire region like we had never seen before. Compare if this deal is real and it turns out the way it looks like it might, compare that to what we've already seen with the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, look, I think, again, this is one of the things that President Trump has brought to the table that previous presidents, certainly since the Cold War ended, never really did, was an economic view of what the Middle East could be, which create conditions then for a lasting peace. And so you had the Abraham Accords, which were groundbreaking. Now you have the opportunity with this peace deal for that to spread and that people are trading with one another in that region. And so the likelihood of of situations that are more volatile becomes less likely, right? So this is all part of the President Trump's sort of doctrine here. And you remember, his first trip overseas was to the Middle East when he was going to Saudi Arabia. He was going to these countries touting the economic reform that they've had over there in that region and the Abraham Accords. And I think you're going to provide conditions here for that to spread. And so again, President Trump's very focused on what America's interest here is. Right. And I think he's, again, provided space for this diplomacy and for a real deal to take place here to open up the straits and prevent them from ever having a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, it turns out that the clarity of an America First agenda is actually a really effective way to get things done. I've got to ask you, I was so impressed with that catch. Is it true you played baseball and football in college?
I did, but that's a long time ago. So, I thought I might make Sports Center, but that's 30 years ago. I'm glad that I was able to make it this week, and I've got the nosebleed to prove it. So
I can only imagine
we were able to come on top.
I can only imagine how mad your wife was when she saw that. I know my wife would have killed me if I'd done that.
You know what? It's hard to impress my wife these days. She was actually impressed with the MVP award, so I'll take it.
All right, there you go. Senator, thank you so much. Great to see you. Okay, coming up, Graham Plattner comes out against the American Dream and is now calling.
Okay, so that was pretty much it for the guy who was replacing Sean Hannity. So yeah, let's go back to Morad Vaisi. No disrespect to that politician. That baseball catch was very cool. I'm sure, like that was very cool. But if he actually thinks that the Islamic regime is going to sign this deal, he's going to have a bad time. He's going to have a bad time, right? Guys, I've told you guys from the beginning, dealing with Iran and dealing with the Islamic regime, you have to be in expert mode. However, what's really interesting about what we watched right now on Fox News is that Fox News kind of gave like the Coles Notes summary of what I literally just shared with you before that Morad Vaisi was explaining in Persian, right? So let's go back to Morad Vaisi's analysis, because I guarantee you the stuff that I'm about to share with you that I've translated from his live stream earlier today, the stuff that I'm going to share with you, you might hear some of it on mainstream media, but you're not going to hear all of it. And I have a feeling that if that politician, and no disrespect, very respectful to all politicians, but I have a feeling that if he knew about what the Islamic regime and Abbas Araghchi were seeing behind the back of President Trump and Americans, he probably would not be as optimistic as he is right now. So anyways, let's continue. Because here's the thing. Even if the Islamic regime signs the deal, they're not actually going to abide by the deal. Like, they're not going to respect the terms of the deal because it's taqiyya, right? And they even said it on Fox News. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If their lips are moving, they are lying. They will lie to your face because that's how they've survived for the last 47 years. Well, let's continue. So, going back to Morad Vaisi's analysis. So, Morad Vaisi turns to comments made by Abbas Araghchi, that's the foreign affairs minister, on Islamic regime media outlets, which is basically Durka News Network. Then he says, according to Morad Vaisi, Araghchi said several notable things. The first thing he said is that the memorandum of understanding is associated with Islamabad. The Islamic Republic apparently prefers that Pakistan receive credit for the diplomatic process rather than Qatar. And Morad Vaisi found that very politically interesting. He also says that Araghchi said that the memorandum concerns ending the war. However, Morad Vaisi says the Americans want to emphasize the nuclear aspects, while the Islamic regime wants to emphasize the end of hostilities. And again, when the Islamic regime is talking about the end of hostilities, they're portraying it as if the United States has surrendered. Each side is highlighting the parts of the agreement that best support its narrative. And then Morad Vaisi continues, saying that on Islamic regime state TV, the foreign affairs minister, Abbas Araghchi, further stated that the future administration of the Strait of Hormuz would not be the same as it was in the past. The Americans, by contrast, want the Strait of Hormuz to function as it did previously. And he says, at this stage, right now, both sides are claiming significant concessions and victories. One side says it gained major advantages. The other side is saying the same thing. But Morad Vaisi continues, and guys, this is really important. This is important for all of you. Pay attention to this part. Let me take a sip. So Morad Vaisi continues. Until the actual text is released, no one can know who truly conceded what or who gained what. And he continues, even after publication, each side will present its own interpretation. And he says, Islamic regime state TV will likely declare victory. And he says, of course, President Trump will declare victory. And he says, Abbas Araghchi also reportedly stated in Islamic regime TV today that the memorandum contains 14 articles, but is less than 2 pages long. So, you know the 14 articles that, the 14 points that we shared earlier today? Yeah. Abbas Araghchi is claiming on Islamic regime TV that the memorandum of understanding includes those 14 points, even though President Trump came out and denied it on Truth Social. But that narrative is still being shared in Persian on Islamic regime state TV. I don't know how a peace treaty with 14 points can be less than 2 pages long. Literally makes no sense to me. As a former lawyer, former politician, that makes no sense. But let's continue, because Morad Vaisi is literally exposing the foreign affairs minister of the Islamic regime. So Morad Vaisi exposes Araghchi by saying that Araghchi is saying that the memorandum contains 14 articles but is less than 2 pages long, and that the text underwent extensive revisions before reaching its current form. Oh, whoa! Oh my God! Whoa! Okay, this part is wild. So apparently, Abbas Araghchi also declared that, quote, our sword will remain over the Strait of Hormuz forever. Yeah. Someone should send this to mainstream media. Abbas Araghchi in Persian is saying on Durka News Network, behind the backs of, Americans and the world and President Trump and everyone else, he's literally saying, our sword will remain over the Strait of Hormuz forever. Yeah. Guys, does that sound like the Islamic regime is about to sign a peace treaty? Does that sound like the Islamic regime is about to, concede and end their, nuclear military program? Guys, I'm not joking. Like, oh my gosh, like, this is wild. Because okay, I'm not even joking. Let me show this to you. Let me take a screenshot here because, I'm reading, I'm literally reading the translation of Morad Vaisi's analysis from earlier today. Abbas Araghchi, guys, oh my gosh. So the foreign affairs minister, okay, this is a guy this is a guy that President Trump quoted on his Truth Social, right? So this is a guy. This is a guy, okay? Here, wait. Let me make this big so that you guys can see this, because this is wild. So President Trump shared this image of, this screenshot of Abbas Araghchi, the foreign affairs minister, on his Truth Social today. So Abbas Araghchi, in English, he posted, the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding has never been closer. Pending its finalization, the media should refrain from entering speculation about its content. And then he continues and he says, in line with our responsible and transparent approach, all details will be shared with the public in due course. So this is what, let me change the comments here. So this is what Abbas Araghchi is saying in English, okay? But this is what he said today afterwards in Persian on Islamic regime media outlets. He literally said, guys, I'm not even joking. This is a direct translation from Morad Vaisi's geopolitical analysis. Abbas Araghchi, the same guy, the same Durka jihadi terrorist that President Trump quote posted on his Truth Social, after he posted in English, he literally went and he said on Islamic Regime State TV, our sword will remain over the Strait of Hormuz forever. Right? Like, guys, do you see what the Islamic regime is? This is why when I say if their lips are moving, they're lying. Does this guy literally sound like someone who wants to make a peace treaty? Or someone who's going to, I don't know, honor a peace treaty with the United States? Oh my gosh, like I wish, like guys, like this is what I mean when I say like, like American mainstream media. I mean, Fox News is pretty good. Fox News, some Newsmax people, some One America News Network people, some News Nation people, but you never get the full picture. Could you imagine if like someone sent this to Fox News? Because that would change the entire analysis of what they're saying. Like someone needs to send this to that poor, the poor politician, the well-intentioned guy who like did the baseball catch or whatever, right? Someone send this to him and be like, okay, if you are so hopeful and positive that the Islamic regime is going to sign a peace treaty, what do you make of this? When one of the terms of, one of the red lines of President Trump is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, right? And then literally the Durkas are like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. But then they go and they say in Persian on their Durka news network, they're like, our sword will remain over the Strait of Hormuz forever. Blech. Literally garbage people. This is why I've always said you cannot negotiate with terrorists because they're literally insane. They're literally insane. All right, anyways, let's continue because I'm sure Morad Vaisi has probably even more gems for us, right? And guys, this is why I'm sharing and translating Morad Vaisi for you guys, because the stuff, like the info, the insider info and intel that Morad Vaisi has, you cannot find anywhere else. Like you will never find this anywhere on like mainstream news when it comes to the internal division and collapse. Anyways, let's continue. So Morad Vaisi says, Abbas Araghchi declared that our sword will remain over the Strait of Hormuz forever. And then he continues. He says, this statement by Abbas Araghchi is exactly what worries neighboring countries, because these countries do not want an agreement that leaves the Islamic Republic in a position to threaten shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. And their argument is simple. If the United States is signing an agreement, it should provide reassurance that such threats by the Islamic regime will not continue. One major issue that apparently is not addressed in the memorandum is Iran's missile program. And Morad Vaisi says he's going to discuss this later. Then he continues, both Israel and neighboring Arab countries have concerns about the Islamic regime's missile capabilities. If the missile issue is excluded from negotiations, Morad Vaisi believes the agreement may face serious problems in the future. And then he continues and he says, let's assume that an agreement is actually signed. I mean, it has not been signed yet, not even the memorandum, let alone a comprehensive agreement. But he says to his viewers who are, Iranian viewers from inside of Iran and throughout the world. So he says to the Iranian viewers, let's just assume that an agreement is signed. And then he continues. He says, even then, if the fundamental disputes remain unresolved, and if the two sides' perceptions of each other do not change, one of them will eventually walk away from the deal and the situation will return to where it started. So Morad Vaisi himself believes that even if a deal is signed, eventually one side will walk away because they're not going to be able to actually, especially the Islamic regime, is not going to be able to comply with the terms. And then he continues and he says, as Araghchi, remember, Araghchi is the foreign affairs minister. By the way, guys, Araghchi, oh no, my app crashed. Araghchi, his last name means from Iraq. So there you go. All right. Sorry, guys. Let me just scroll down. My app crashed here, and I was reading this for you. Where were we? Okay, there we go. So Morad Vaisi says he thinks that even if a deal is signed, one side will eventually walk away because the Islamic regime is incapable of. By the way, guys, this is Morad Vaisi here. So for everyone tuning in, the person on my screen, this is Morad Vaisi. He is not even joking. Like, he is literally the top geopolitical analyst when it comes to Iran. Okay? This is Morad Vaisi. This is his YouTube channel. He goes live every day. And usually he goes live around 7:30, but today we got a special treat. He went live an hour earlier. So that's why I'm able to bring you his most latest analysis. And guys, like, he is exposing everything. He is pretty much exposing the meltdown from inside the Islamic regime. And he's fantastic. We all, respect him so much. Many of us call him Amu Morad or Amu Vaisi. Yeah, he's great. And he literally has the best analysis that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. So, yeah, I would say go subscribe. But I mean, he only does live streams in the Persian language. So it would be difficult unless you like speak Persian and understand Persian. It's difficult to follow along with what he's saying, but that's okay. That's why you have me. I'm here to translate it all for you and provide my commentary. Oh no, my browser lost audio. Let me just reshare my browser again. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's continue. So, as Araghchi himself reportedly said, the memorandum of understanding between the United States and the Islamic regime is only about 2 pages long. Guys, it doesn't even make any sense. Okay. Former politician, former lawyer. There is no way that a memorandum of understanding between the United States and the Islamic regime occupying Iran is only 2 pages long. The preamble itself is probably a page and a half or 2 pages long. This shows how uneducated Araghchi actually is. He's literally just like pulling numbers out of thin air. Because Araghchi is saying that the memorandum of understanding is only 2 pages long. How does that even, guys, the font and the type font wouldn't even work. Anyways, let's continue. So Abbas Araghchi is saying the memorandum is only 2 pages long. And Morad Vaisi says that he believes 2 pages of paper cannot prevent renewed conflict or even another war. He says the 2 pages of paper cannot prevent another conflict or even another war between the United States and the Islamic Republic if the underlying disputes remain in place. And he says if the core disagreements remain unresolved and if each side continues to view the other in the same way, the agreement will be fragile. Morad Vaisi says he does not see any evidence that the Islamic Republic's view of the United States has fundamentally changed. Guys, this is really important. Let me repeat this because this is exactly what I've been saying as well. So Morad Vaisi says there is no evidence that the Islamic Republic view of the United States has fundamentally changed. He describes 3 different levels of agreement between adversaries. The first level is a tactical agreement, and at this level, parties agree on temporary arrangements. The second level is agreement on fundamental disputes, and at this stage, the parties resolve their core disagreements. The third and highest level is when they fundamentally change how they view one another. Morad Vaisi says, guys, this is the top Iran analyst in the world, okay? This guy is like literally the top Iran and geopolitical Middle Eastern analyst in the world. And he literally says, and I quote, he believes that even if something is signed, it will only be the first level, a tactical understanding. In other words, Morad Vaisi is saying if the Islamic regime signs anything, all that the Islamic regime is saying is, let's negotiate and let's stop fighting for now, because he does not believe that the United States and the Islamic Republic will actually resolve their 5 major disputes. And remember, the 5 major disputes are ending the nuclear military enrichment program, removing the uranium dust, ending the ballistic missile program, stopping the funding of their terrorist proxy groups in the Middle East, and of course, reopening the Strait of Hormuz with 0 conditions. Morad Vaisi says, the top Iran analyst, he sees little chance of that happening. For example, Morad Vaisi does not expect the Islamic regime to compromise significantly on its ballistic missile program. In his view, that missile program is one of the regime's few remaining sources of power against Israel, Arab states, and American military bases. The United States says that missile capabilities should be limited, both in quantity and in range. The Islamic regime says it will not accept such restrictions. The same disagreements exist regarding the nuclear program. The same disagreements exist regarding proxy forces. And for that reason, Morad Vaisi does not believe the core disputes between the Islamic regime occupying Iran and the United States can truly be resolved. But then he continues and he says, let's assume an even more unlikely scenario. He says, let's assume that after signing a memorandum, they actually managed to resolve their fundamental disagreements over the next 3 or 4 years. Morad Vaisi says, Would such an agreement be durable? And his answer is still no. Such an agreement would not be durable. Because he says, if the Islamic Republic's view of the United States does not change, and if its broader regional outlook does not change, then the agreement will not last. Murad Vaisi says that the Islamic Republic cannot maintain a lasting agreement with the United States while simultaneously continuing its anti-American and anti-Israeli policies. Murad Vaisi is literally referring to the Islamic regime going, death to America, death to Israel, right? That's what Murad Vaisi is referring to, right? So Murad Vaisi is saying the Islamic regime can't maintain a lasting agreement with the United States while they're literally at the same time continuing to call America the great Satan and Israel the little Satan. And he says if those policies continue, eventually the same tensions will reappear. And according to Murad Vaisi, this is the key part. Okay, if there's one thing that you need to remember from tonight, one thing you need to learn from tonight about the Islamic regime and exposing the Islamic regime, it's this. Because what Murad Vaisi is about to say is what I've been saying, and I 100% agree with him on this, okay? Everything that's happening right now between the Islamic regime, all these negotiations and talks and, pretending to, come to terms and, whatever. Murad Vaisi, the top Iran geopolitical analyst and expert in the world, he is saying the Islamic Republic, with everything that it's doing, is primarily trying to buy time. Let me repeat that. Everything that the Islamic regime is doing is because they're trying to buy time. It is a delay tactic. Murad Vaisi believes that the Islamic regime is hoping to outlast both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he continues, and he says, the calculation of the Islamic regime is that once President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are gone, the pressure on the Islamic regime will ease. And he continues to say that the Islamic regime occupying Iran, their main concern is not the economic suffering of ordinary Iranians. The main concern of the Islamic regime occupying Iran is survival. In his view, the Islamic Republic measures success very differently. The Islamic regime measures success in the fact that it is still there. And he says, the Islamic regime, measures success by saying, if we are not overthrown, then we have won. And according to Murad Vaisi, the Islamic regime does not judge success based on economic prosperity, public welfare, or national development. The Islamic regime judges success simply by remaining in power. That is the difference, guys. So that is the difference between a totalitarian Islamic dictatorship that has to murder its own people in order to remain in power versus a regular, normal, democratic government, right? Because a normal government judges success based on what they do to improve, the lives of everyday, ordinary civilians. And I was a politician for 7 years. I was in politics for 10 years. You judge success based on what you're able to do to improve the lives of people who voted to represent you. I mean, that's a, in a normal governmental system anyway. But here's the thing, and this is the one of the key aspects, like the key points that a lot of people, especially Western, journalists and analysts and pundits and whoever, they don't know this. They don't get this. This is like key insider information that you need in order to understand the Islamic regime. Because I will repeat this again. Morad Vaisi says the Islamic regime does not judge success based on economic prosperity, public welfare, or national development. It judges success simply by remaining in power. He continues to say that even the deaths of senior leaders, right? And so the deaths of senior leaders, that's where he's referring to what I like to call the boom boom bingo sheet. So let me bring up the boom boom bingo sheet for you guys. Okay. This is the boom boom bingo sheet. And make it bigger for you. So all these people who are in gray, they've all been boom boomed, right? So these are all these people who have been boom boomed recently. So Morad Vaisi is saying even the deaths of senior leaders do not alter the calculation, right? It does not alter the calculation of the success of the Islamic regime by remaining in power. In Morad Vaisi's view, the Islamic regime's attitude is this. If Khamenei dies, Khamenei being the supreme dictator, if Larijani dies, if Shamkhani dies, if dozens of senior commanders die, none of that matters as long as the system survives. Okay, guys, this is, wow, this is like huge for you. I mean, this is kind of common knowledge for us, but this is like big for you guys because you never hear this analysis in the mainstream media. So let me bring this up for you, okay? Let me share this boom boom bingo sheet, and I'm going to repeat what Morad Vaisi just said, and I'm going to point out the people that he's referring to, okay? This will be a nice treat for you guys. So, Morad Vaisi says, even if Khamenei dies, Khamenei is this one, right? So Khamenei was exterminated on February 28. And then he says, even if Larijani dies, Larijani is this one. Larijani here was exterminated, right? So even if Khamenei dies, even if Larijani dies, even if Shamkhani dies, Shamkhani is this one here. Shamkhani is this one, okay? Remember, Shamkhani is the one that was buried without a head because they couldn't find his head. So after they boom boomed Shamkhani, they couldn't find his head. So there's like a lot of memes from Iranians where they're like, making fun of him for being buried without a head. Kind of funny. I mean, serves them right? Like, I mean, they're all terrorists. Like, they're all Muslim Nazis, right? So yeah. So, but here's the thing. Morad Vaisi is saying like, and do you see like, when you're looking at the boom boom bingo sheet, these are like the top people. Like Khamenei and Larijani and Shamkhani, these were like top level people. Like they were pretty much the system. They were the system and they were all exterminated. Okay? Like they're literally exterminated. They're gone. They're gone. So Morad Vaisi continues. Okay. And he says, even if Khamenei dies, even if Larijani dies, even if Shamkhani dies, even if dozens of senior commanders die, which they have, none of that matters as long as the system of the Islamic regime survives. And Morad Vaisi continues, and this is the input and analysis that you guys need to understand. He says, the Islamic regime places survival above everything else. The Islamic regime occupying Iran places its survival above everything else. And that is why the Islamic regime is literally willing to massacre over 40,000 innocent unarmed Iranians on 2 days alone back in January, because they place survival above everything else. It's pretty much modern day jihad. It's this is my own commentary. Like, it's literally modern day jihad, because whenever they murder Iranians, they murder us for the crime of waging war against Allah. Because apparently, if we are against the Islamic regime, we are enemies of Allah, and according to their religion, that means we are kafirs, and we could be murdered. So, yeah, any Iranian who opposes the Islamic regime, we're kafirs, and we can be murdered. Yeah. Anyways, let's continue. So after Morad Vaisi talks about how the Islamic regime places survival above everything else, he then makes a broader criticism. Morad Vaisi argues that the leadership values neither the lives of ordinary people nor even the lives of its own senior officials. I literally just said that. I literally just said the Islamic regime does not even value the lives of the Iranian people. They view us as infidels. So there you go. I was right. And then Morad Vaisi points to the fact that the Islamic regime is willing to negotiate with people it previously denounced as enemies, right? The Islamic regime apparently is literally willing to negotiate with the Americans, who literally exterminated their beloved Ayatollah, Khamenei or whatever, right? The United States exterminated Khamenei, and now there are people within the Islamic regime that are literally prepared to negotiate with them. So, anyways, and he says, according to him, so Morad Vaisi says, according to this analysis, he thinks that this demonstrates that preserving power is the overriding objective. Now, Morad Vaisi continues, and he says, there was a time when officials insisted they would never compromise on certain issues. Now, however, Morad Vaisi is seeing signs of gradual retreat and compromise. And he says he is going to keep an eye on this internal meltdown. And he's going to discuss later what he considers to be several examples of such concessions. But returning to the matter at hand, the negotiations, Morad Vaisi notes that Araghchi has said the blockade must be lifted first. The American position, however, is reportedly that the Strait of Hormuz must first be reopened. Araghchi has also said that uranium dilution can occur inside Iran. And Morad Vaisi says the Americans, they reportedly do not object to this as long as the material loses its weapons potential. That's what the media is reporting. But whether or not President Trump has actually agreed to that is a whole other story. Araghchi, the foreign affairs minister of the Islamic regime, further stated that the Supreme National Security Council is supervising the negotiations. Oh, whoa. Whoa, what? The Supreme National Security Council. Oh, man. Ooh, that is awkward. Okay, guys. So, Supreme National Security Council. This is the Supreme Security Council here. Apparently, these guys are the ones who are overlooking or supervising the negotiations. Larijani was, first of all, boom-boomed because he was, extreme. Okay, if the Supreme Security Council is the one overseeing the negotiations, there is literally no way that they are ever going to there's no way that they're ever going to agree to that. Like, they're never going to agree. There's no way, because like these are like the crazy like jihadis. Like, these are the Durkas. Oh my gosh, wait. We just check something here. So okay. Yeah, no, wow, okay. So it's true. The guys, so this is this, oh my gosh. Oh, it makes sense. This is what Marco Rubio was talking about. Okay, wait, I have to pull this up. This was from Marco Rubio's Senate hearing, where he was talking about the Supreme Council. I know I shared this before, but let me find the section in the transcript. Here we go. Okay, this is the part. So, when Murad Vaisi is talking about how the Supreme National Council is supervising the negotiations, right? And basically he says this is intended to signal that the foreign minister is not acting alone. Okay, so let's go to Marco Rubio, because Marco Rubio spoke about the Supreme National Council, and you know, I provided my analysis on this, but here you go. Just more examples of Goldie's always right. Watch this, guys. This is wild.
Not only President Trump and the administration, but for the United States, and I'm grateful for that. Was wondering at the outset if you could talk to us a little bit about the fractured Iranian regime and how that might be making negotiations more difficult. One of the things I've wondered, for example, are whether the diplomatic Iranian channels are sort of crosswise, at odds with, or working hand in glove with the IRGC, which is itself causing a lot of these ceasefire violations, or is it all sort of coordinated chaos to try to undermine and tip the scales in favor of Iran in the negotiations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me try to give this answer to you in a way that's not boring or wonky, because it's been a shift. Obviously, the original Supreme Leader, the one that was there, is no longer with us. His son takes over. Nobody hears from him for a month. By all reports, open source reporting, I think you've all seen it, he was severely injured in the same strike, and so forth.
Are you confident he's still alive, by the way?
Yeah, I think there's indications that, in fact, we've not heard from him publicly. We haven't seen him publicly. And I would imagine, given what's happened to multiple leaders in that system, being very public is probably not something that's recommended for them internally. But that said, I think there are indications out there that he is increasingly engaging at some level, although all of his communications have been in writing and through intermediaries. So the way to think about it is the following. You have the Supreme Leader, and understand that at the end of the day, the Supreme Leader in their system there really is no analogy to it in our system or anybody else's system. It is a theological office. It was the head of the Islamic Republic in the sense of the ultimate decision maker. And every major decision has to be run by them. They are advised by a council. It's not clear if it's 6 people or 8 people, but there is a council made up of both IRGC and other elements of the regime that surround that Supreme Leader. And ultimately, that council has to sign off on anything. And then there are the people you see on TV, like Araghchi, who's out there every single day, and Ghalibaf, who's the speaker of the Majlis, who's been playing a pretty prominent role. And they are the ones that they have sent to negotiations and so forth. It is our view of the system, as we understand it, and as it's been expressed to us both by the intermediaries and by Iran directly, that what Araghchi and Ghalibaf bring or take from us, they then have to run back to this council and ultimately get guidance from them. And that process oftentimes takes 3 to 5 days to get a response. Now, some of it is logistical. They're operating probably using couriers and things of this nature. Part of it is internal fissures on exactly what they should agree to or not agree to. I think the second point that needs to be driven in this regard is that there is evidence that there are communications issues within the regime as well. So, for example, it's pretty clear that at the outset of hostilities in the conflict, they had delegated decision-making to field commanders. And so oftentimes field commanders had delegated authority to act on a, let's say, a pre-operational planning that already put in place. And so unlike our system where perhaps you know that the president or the secretary of war is directly making orders and decisions, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, in their system, a lot of decision-making at the tactical level, like which ships to hit and so forth, are being made at the commander level. So that's
why from the outset it can look like fire-ready aim, but it's part of the design of the system, perhaps?
Well, I think it was a design of the system in the sense of regime survival and the ability to operate in case there was decapitation strikes or people are removed. But let's go back to the essence of the negotiations. What's complicated them is you ultimately are negotiating with people who then have to negotiate within their own system to see what they're allowed to give and what they're allowed to agree to. What is abundantly clear is that Iran is facing severe internal economic. All the problems Iran had before this conflict not only are still there, but they're worse. All the things that led to the protests, all of these are worse than they were before. And I think there's definitely elements within that regime that understand it. And then there are other elements of it that are more immune to it and perhaps more resistant to making agreements. And so what we are working through is in many cases is delays in getting the responses to people. And this is why you see reporting about there might be a deal in the next few days, because internally it takes time to get responses from them, sometimes upward to 5 or 6 days.
Undoubtedly, they're using that to their advantage.
There you go. So that was what Marco Rubio was saying last week. You know, basically sharing information that, you know, we Iranians have known for a very, very long time. So, all right, guys, there's still a lot more to this incredibly informative analysis by Morad Vaisi. But, you know, we're literally about halfway through his analysis, but I do have to call it a night because we're getting to the 2-hour mark. So let me go to your questions and comments and super chats. And then afterwards, we're going to call it a night. But guys, I will continue with translating this analysis for you. So make sure that you like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, because part 2 is coming tomorrow. And there's a lot of very interesting and spicy things that Morad Vaisi has in his analysis tonight. So let's go to your questions and comments. So Justin Lefevre says, Mr. President, you're a fool if you believe these barbarians will actually be faithful to this agreement. If, however, this is some grand scheme to get them to turn on each other, I tip my hat to you. We'll see. So, I mean, President Trump did make it clear on his Truth Social post today. Let me just pull that up. I mean, where was this Truth Social post? I mean, I can't remember the exact wording, but President Trump did make it very clear that he does not trust the Islamic regime and that they're very dishonorable and that they are liars. So I have a feeling President Trump knows that you cannot trust them. I have a feeling. But thank you so much. Tread gifted 5 memberships. Thank you so much. Nahni Lucy became a new member. Welcome to Goldie's gang. And then Daniel says, Goldie, your mods are the best. Javid mods. Honestly, like, I do literally have, I would say, like, I have the best mods on YouTube, on any YouTube channel. Definitely bragging. Literally, we have such an amazing community. Guys, everyone put, like, I don't know, an M in the chat to show appreciation for all of our mods. They work so hard. You guys are here. You give it your all. So yeah, let's show some appreciation to all of our mods, like mod appreciation night. So thank you, all of you, for being here constantly and contributing to the live stream and the chat. And honestly, like, I always receive so many compliments about the mods on this channel. And I think part of the reason is because, we have a no tolerance approach when it comes to trolls or hate speech or, just like spamming or things like that. Right. And that actually helps to keep the chat, readable, and people can have like an engaging debate or conversation. It's not to say, you can't disagree. Absolutely, you can disagree, but the internet has become a place for trolls to just go and just like post whatever garbage nonsense, right? So no, the mods do a great job. Thank you so much. You guys are phenomenal. So thank you so much, and thank you, Daniel, for acknowledging the mods. Tread says, trying to get Goldie's membership up. Thank you. I appreciate that. Very, very thoughtful of you. Yeah, I mean, like the memberships do actually help me, kind of keep the channel going, and it kind of allows me to do what I'm doing on a full-time basis, to continue sharing news and information. So thank you so much, Tread. It means a lot to me. Tom for Life says, happy Friday to all of you, and to anyone who's celebrating Shabbat Shalom as well. So Tom for Life says, happy Friday with the French fries. Now you're making me crave French fries. There definitely was a lot propaganda wars today in the media, with conflicting reports, positioning, and denials. Thanks for making sense of it all. Don't worry, guys. That's why I'm here. You're going to see a lot of random stuff in the mainstream media or on X or social media or whatever. Keep in mind, guys, never ever forget, the Islamic regime literally has a ministry dedicated to cyber warfare. The Islamic regime occupying Iran spends upwards of $1 billion a year on its information, disinformation, misinformation, propaganda warfare. So if you're feeling confused, that's okay. That's not a you problem. You're confused because that's what the Islamic regime's propaganda network is doing. But that's okay. That's why you're tuning in here, because I'm here to explain it all, lay it all out for you, and make sense of all the confusion, because we Iranians, we've been dealing with this nonsense for the last 47 years. So we're kind of experts. We're kind of pros in smelling out, tequila. We're pros in the red flags of Islamic terrorism and all that stuff. But yeah, happy Friday. And I love the American flag. God bless America. Tread says, nobody will ever understand Trump. Just know when he gets what he wants, he'll let everyone know repeatedly. I agree. And that's why I've always said, you have to look at President Trump's actions in their entirety. You can't just cherry pick what he says here and there. You have to take a holistic approach. And the holistic approach is that President Trump has pretty much, in my opinion, he has put the Islamic regime in a checkmate situation where no matter what move the Islamic regime makes, it's going to lead to their collapse. And that's why the Islamic regime is so desperate to delay. Because again, as Morad Vaisi was saying in his analysis, success to the Islamic regime is judged by whether or not they survive. So as long as the Islamic regime survives, they view that as a victory. They view that as success. There you go. And then Tread gifted 5 memberships. Thank you very much. And then Tread continues and says, once the Persian culture and intelligence is freed, the world will be blessed. Thank you. I appreciate that. I've actually done a lot of documentary watch parties on, Iran prior to 1979 and, all of that. So definitely make sure to check out my documentary watch parties on that as well. And then Tread continues, look up to the sky and smile back. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, guys. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Also, especially a huge shout out to all the Americans who are tuning in to hear from an Iranian who's living in Canada about what's happening in occupied Iran. Guys, honestly, that means so much to me. And I'm so grateful to all of you, especially to, all of our American viewers and friends, because I know, guys, for the last 47 years, all you've heard is, Iran, terrorism, and death to America and all that. And the fact that all of you guys have had an open mind and you were willing to come to my channel and learn about the real Iran and the true Iran and the Iran that used to be an ally of the United States and the Iran that literally was, giving oil to the United States during the Arab oil embargo. It was the Persians. The Persians were the ones giving oil to the United States when the Arabs had their oil embargo, right? But then the Islamic regime took over and turned our country into a 7th century Islamic hellhole. And I'm so grateful to all of you, because I know for 47 years the Islamic regime put out this propaganda that Iranians hate you and Iranians hate America, blah, 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 Durka, whatever. But that's literally the farthest thing from the truth. And so I'm grateful to all of you. I mean, I'm grateful to all of our viewers from all around the world. I love you all. I'm so appreciative. But most especially, I'm grateful to Americans, because even though the Islamic regime has been chanting death to America, for those of you who are here, either watching live or you're watching afterwards, you know that this whole death to America garbage nonsense is part of the Islamic regime. That's Islamic terrorism. It has nothing to do with Iran or the Iranian identity or Iranian culture or Iranian civilization. Prior to 1979, Iran was one of the biggest allies of the United States. And I guarantee you that as soon as Iran is free, Iran will once again be your biggest ally. And we will once again go back to having that friendship that we used to have before the Muslim Nazis took over our country. Because Americans and Iranians, we share a common enemy. And that enemy is the Islamic regime. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in. This has been the Friday evening edition of The Goldie Show. I'm Goldie Ghamari, former Canadian politician, current geopolitical analyst, and Iran human rights activist. And as always, now you know. Thank you for tuning in. See you guys tomorrow.